Faced with the opportunities and challenges of the real world, a couple tries to navigate the ups and downs of maintaining a long-distance relationship. Lee Jan-yuk arrived at the hospital very ill, in unbearable pain, but he was worried about missing work. His parents didn't stay with him because they feared catching hepatitis, but a kind nurse named Dean took care of him. She defended him to the other patients by explaining that he had hepatitis B, which is not contagious, as no one wanted to come near him. Upon leaving the room, Lee Jan discovered the nurse smoking, which surprised him greatly. He noticed her ring but realized it was just a graduation ring. Just then, the head nurse caught them smoking, and Dean blamed Lee Jan, fearing that if she were caught, her pay would be delayed. Lee Jan, who had developed feelings for Dean, began to grow closer to her. Exhausted from work, she would sometimes sleep in his bed, and when he went out to smoke, Dean would scold him, which was quite ironic since she had smoked first. Despite this, Lee Jan continued to be kind and caring towards her. He was completely in love with Dean and took great care of her, but she started to avoid him after he mentioned he would never want a girlfriend, which upset her. When Lee Jan was informed that he would be discharged, he pretended to be sicker than he was because he didn't want to leave Dean. On the day of his discharge, he was upset about leaving the hospital, while his friends thought he was hallucinating about liking the nurse. Determined to find her, he called every number in the phone directory with similar names until Dean answered. He confessed his strong feelings for her, and she invited him to her place. Without a second thought, he took his father's car and went to her apartment. Dean found him very sweet and funny and invited him to stay the night. They grew closer, with him changing her light bulbs and making her a big breakfast, which led to a kiss. As they became even more connected, Dean grew more tired from work, but Lee Jan was overjoyed. His parents noticed his happiness and asked if he was dating someone, though they didn't believe him. They had become a couple, though his father was furious about the car. Dean stopped wearing her graduation ring and invited him on vacation, but Lee Jan felt too overweight and was discouraged, feeling unworthy of her. Dean bought him a pair of shoes for their trip and promised to lose weight, so he started exercising with his new sneakers to become better for her. Dean was exhausted from her 8-hour shifts but very happy with Jan-yuk. He was working hard and promised a permanent position if he excelled. His boss encouraged him to push himself, which he vowed to do, but Dean was saddened because he would have to move away. She encouraged him to follow his dreams. Jan-yuk bought a new car because he didn't want to keep using his father's and gave Dean a ring to replace her lost graduation ring. He promised to travel from Seoul to see her every day. At his new job, he met his colleague Han Boyan, who was always angry. They had to compete for their job, and Jan-yuk confided in Dean about his difficult coworker. Dean advised him to win her over. Han Boyan stole coffee meant for Jan-yuk and gave it to the boss, pretending it was from her. She also tricked him into presenting a project that hadn't been requested. Jan-yuk often complained to Dean about his crazy colleague but never let Dean share her own experiences. Jan-yuk tried to sabotage Han Boyan in a project, but it backfired, and they were forced to work together to become a better team. She grew to dislike him even more, but their work required them to spend more time together. Meanwhile, the traffic was wearing Jan-yuk out, so Dean suggested they meet only on weekends so he could rest. Han Boyan, despite Jan-yuk finding her disgusting, was very diligent and eventually impressed their bosses with their teamwork. The boss noticed their chemistry and assigned them another project together. Jan-yuk became increasingly stressed by the traffic and arrived home to find Dean absent due to a schedule change at work. She asked him to change a light bulb at home. Han Boyan started to appreciate Jan-yuk as a work partner since they complemented each other well in their projects. Jan-yuk informed Dean that he wouldn't be able to come home that night, and as days passed, he spent more and more time growing closer to Han Boyan. Their bosses increasingly praised them for doing incredible work. Han Boyan invites Jan-yuk for a drink, but that night he had promised to go home to Dean after days of not seeing her. He tells Dean he's still working and didn't even change the light bulb at home. Han Boyan begins to show interest in her coworker since they spend late nights working alone at the office, but Jan-yuk rejects her and goes home to his girlfriend. Dean asks him to help with the trash or the light bulb since she's been working extra shifts at the hospital and finds him very selfish. Dean then informs him that her period is late, and although Jan-yuk says nothing, he does take out the trash. Later, Dean confirms she visited the doctor and is 4 weeks pregnant, but they decide not to have the baby. Jan-yuk returns to work and again goes days without visiting home. The traffic on the way back is torture, so he always arrives home exhausted. This life is wearing him out more and more. Now he comes home daily, but due to fatigue, he barely talks to Dian and is always tired at work. He's coming home because he feels guilty about the baby. One day, he's late for work and blames Dian for making him late, even though she left for work at midnight. So he starts staying at work overnight again with his coworker, and they seem increasingly close. When he returns home, he's bored and doesn't enjoy their time together. Dian asks if he's tired of seeing her, as she also has a lot of work and is often exhausted. Jan-yuk apologizes but accidentally calls her by his coworker's name. He doesn't even realize what he's done, so Dian asks who Han Boyan is, which makes Jan-yuk angry for accusing him of cheating. He doesn't come home because he misses her but out of a sense of obligation and guilt. Dian returns the ring to Jan-yuk. In front of his coworker, he starts an affair with her, sleeping together and starting a relationship. Han Boyan expresses her desire to have a baby soon. At this moment, Jan-yuk receives a notification about a planned trip with Dian. He tells Dian to take someone else on the trip. Despite being praised at work for their excellent performance, neither of them secures the permanent position they were vying for. They decide to go their separate ways, with Han Boyan wanting Jan-yuk to follow her, but he leaves the party to chase after Dian. Dian is ready to go on vacation to the island. At the airport, she's happy, but not because of Jan-yuk. Another guy, whom she met at the hospital, is there. She had given them both the same pair of sneakers, and their names are almost identical, but it was Lee Jan-yuk whom she met about 3 months ago when the other guy left to prioritize his job. When Dian went through the worst of her pregnancy loss, it was the new Lee Jan-yuk who was there for her. He was the one who changed the light bulb and whom she decided to take on the vacation plan with her ex-fiancé. Now that he's back, she is not alone and has someone who truly supports her, so she doesn't even acknowledge the other guy. In desperation, Jan-yuk returns to the party, not even sure when everything fell apart. Desperate, he proposes to Han Boyan, but she rejects him too.